Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for dialing in for this fourth in the final of 4 webinars on the Safe Drinking Water Act, Clean Water Act Toolkit. We have had a number of these previously. In the first one, we did an overview of the toolkit as a whole, and then in the subsequent webinars, took sections of each of those toolkits to kind of expound on more, give some big picture perspectives, talk about some success stories in the States. On your screen now, you should be seeing a copy of that. I was just going to show very briefly. Each of the 3 associations have a copy of this on their website. On the GWPC website, to find a copy of the toolkit, you simply go to Resources at the top screen and then click on Publications. And these are both GWPC and partnering publications. If you scroll down a little ways, you'll find this Opportunities to Protect Drinking Water Sources. And so when you open it up, you get this PDF document. And then just to scroll down and show you, as I said earlier, in previous webinars, we have covered several of these other sections. And then today we'll be covering the 5th and final section using Nonpoint Source and Clean Water Act 319 programs, and talking about opportunities to partner between source water, drinking water programs, and these NPS and Clean Water Act 319 programs. Once you're in the document, if you scroll all the way down to page 55, that's where that section of the document starts. So to give us an overview, we've invited Sid Curtis from EPA, and I'm going to open Sid's PowerPoint while I'm introducing her. And Sid is with the Nonpoint Source Control Branch of the Environmental Protection Agency. I'm going to run the PowerPoint, but Sid will be talking, and I have unmuted you, Sid, so you should be good to go.
All right, great. Well, if there's any audio problems, please just interrupt me and let me know, and we can adjust as we go. But
great,
hello,
you sound
everyone.
fine.
Good, good. Hello, everyone. Happy Friday afternoon. What I wanted to do is give a quick overview, but just as a lead-in to we hear from Mary Ellen and Josh on the work that they're doing. So next slide, please. There we go. So just as a quick overview for all of us, non-point source pollution is diverse. It comes from many sources. In the world of the 319 grant, however, we see a predominant work that focuses in on agriculture and urban non-point source. However, the other ones you see listed here are significant in what might be a variation. While it might not show up nationally as a big player, if you look in different geographic areas of the U.S., you'll see these like acid mine drainage or hydromod coming up as bigger issues in different parts of the country. Next slide. So one thing we recently did is looked at the latest integrated report and pulled some data to once again just show the huge contribution of non-point source as it relates to impairments in water bodies. And this just gives you a rough statistical overview looking at both rivers and lakes, reservoirs, and ponds. So if we go to the next slide, we'll look a little bit more into the types of pollutants that are associated, or probable causes, I should say, of impairments in streams. And what we've done, unfortunately, it came out lighter than I was hoping, but you'll see there's light blue highlighting of the ones that were attributed to non-point source as a category. These are just the top 10 list. And this is for rivers and streams. And if you hit the next slide, then you can see, for contrast, those ones that come up more for lakes, reservoirs, and ponds. These are the types of categories where, again, highlighted in blue show ones that we consider more connected with non-point source. Next slide. So I've been swinging around the term of 319. One thing is to look at the Section 319 of the Clean Water Act. There's couple points that I'd really like to direct you to. Is 319B is the part of the Act that really describes a state's management program for non-point source. 319H is the actual grant program. So when we're looking for potential opportunities for collaboration, these are the two big pieces that drive the Nonpoint Source program and the grants that we have now. I've also provided an updated link to the current guidance on 319 because I'm not sure if you all are aware, but EPA is migrating all their web to a new driver. So all the web, we're working on getting the addresses to change. So bear with us. I think the next month or two might be a little glitchy as we're getting all the dust settling in the transition. But a couple big points that really I think would be worth highlighting for collaboration in groundwater are the points of Nonpoint Source Management Program plans and watershed-based plans, which are more also known as 9-element plans or A through I plans. Next slide, please. So 319 grants are distributed annually to states from EPA. The EPA regions work more closely with the states directly in review of proposed work, and the stats here just give you a general idea of some of the range of what can be going on in each state. One thing to think of is 319 funds are really considered as a catalyst. They're supposed to help bring other partners, other players to the table to help get things started that might not have otherwise come. And that can come out in a variety of forms, including technical assistance or helping support best management practice implementation. There's quite a range that it can be used for. Next slide. So real quick, just again, on the Nonpoint Source Management Plan, this is a statewide roadmap for program implementation. And in the most recent guidance, many states went through a major update of their management plan. And this is one when my supervisor Linda was talking with others is really encouraging. This is a point, because they're setting statewide priorities in terms of collaboration, this is a great place to engage and look at source water and protection priorities and have the conversations with the Nonpoint Source program as they're looking at this overall statewide plan. Now, at a more local scale, you can look at the watershed plans. So zoning in on a particular area where there might be focus, this is another potential point. If Nonpoint Source is a significant concern for drinking water, then this could be a good tool to look at and make sure that the appropriate stakeholders and partners are involved in the planning process. Next slide. I just wanted to offer a screenshot of an example of one from Salt Creek, Indiana. This is a watershed plan. The areas designated in green are priority areas for protection. The areas in red are for restoration. And so these are the kind of, depending on each watershed group, there's going to be different areas of how they choose to approach. But just to give you an idea of geospatially looking across where are the issues of concern and where would there be good points for collaboration. Next slide. So a point that's important to all of us in terms of we want to show the results of what we've done, and a collaborative opportunity is to start to share these results of how we brought pieces together and talk about our success. One of the ways that we use through 319 is through success stories, and we look at the number of waters that were primarily Nonpoint Source impaired that have been either partially or fully restored as a part of 319 or just Nonpoint Source efforts. It's not necessarily limited to 319. Next slide. Over time, this just shows you I don't have 2015 on here, but right now I can tell you we're somewhere over 600 water bodies that have been partially or fully restored since we started tracking in 2005. And the next slide, I wanted to give you examples that cut across the country. There's a few others too where 319 and source water protection are highlighted on the Success Stories website. And I think, again, just next slide, please. As a quick recap, there's a great opportunity because we share a lot of common ground in terms of what our goals and control practices are and how we engage with local stakeholders in voluntary actions to protect this resource. I think I will, one thing I did put at the bottom here is the newest web URL with all the state coordinators on there. And again, just so you know that this is, we've just recently migrated that work. So if you're seeing any errors out there, please, I think my email's at the beginning of this presentation. We can certainly, if there's any feedback you have, I would like to hear it to make sure we have the current contacts. But also, I'm really looking forward to in the future, one of the things we're exploring is how to capture success in these collaborative efforts and Nonpoint Source as a whole. So if you have examples of a success and how you communicated and relayed that information, I'd be very interested in seeing it, and I'm looking forward to hearing the upcoming presentations and any other discussion we have afterwards. So thank you very much, and I'll hand it back to you, Dan.
Great, thank you, Sid. And just to reiterate to everybody, I didn't mention this at the top of the call, but we'll be putting this recorded webinar and all of the slide presentations online. We'll put them on the GWPC website. I believe SDWA will put them up as well, and we'll be sending out emails from the 3 organizations once those are up and available. Another thing to mention is that we've put everybody on mute for this call. Questions can kind of get out of hand with a large group, and I'm happy to report we're up over 120 attendees today. So I'll be handling questions offline. If you have a question about any of the presentations you see today, you can email me at this address you see on the screen, my email, dyates@gwpc.org, or you can use the question function of the webinar. I'll download those also, and then I'll follow up individually with the various speakers to kind of answer those questions back to you individually, and some of those things we might even send out to a broader email list, depending on the types of questions, if they're more broad than specific. So our next speaker, I'm going to pull up your presentation now, is Mary Ellen Volbrecht from Wisconsin to give an update on some things they're working on in the Wisconsin program. And I am unmuting you now.
Great. Can you hear me, Dan?
Yes, you sound good. Go ahead. Thank you.
Great. Good. Well, as Dan said, I'm Mary Ellen Volbrecht, and I'm the Groundwater Section Chief here at Wisconsin DNR in the Bureau of Drinking Water and Groundwater. And I'm actually here with a number of my colleagues with whom I've worked on these initiatives. So if I talk about them like I own them, I just want to acknowledge the work of others in this room and this building. I hope you're enjoying this glimpse of some of Wisconsin's groundwater at our Apostle Islands ice caves. 15,000 people saw these on one day a couple of years ago, and it's a wonderful vision, just like the one that you folks have of Clean Water Act, Safe Drinking Water Act integration. And also similarly, you can't get to the sea caves every day. Lake Superior doesn't freeze that often, but it is really wonderful when it happens, and that's what's starting to happen here in Wisconsin and across the country. I'm going to talk about some of the things we've done. When Dan asked me for this presentation, I said, well, let me tell you what we've done, and you can see if this is a really cutting edge or not. And we've picked some low-hanging fruit, in my opinion, and we'll tell you about some of the things we're thinking about, and I hope to get some feedback either at the end of today or by phone or email contact on how to deal with our next challenges. So next slide, Dan. Next slide. So this should look familiar. It's my short version of the toolkit, and it really is the Clean Water Act tools that we can use. And they're directly applicable, pretty easy to apply to surface water systems, but next slide will show you some of the challenges we have here in Wisconsin. Those blue dots are our surface water systems. The brown ones are our groundwater public water systems. We really are, outside of our large population centers on the coast and our Lake Winnebago systems, which have huge watersheds, we are dependent for drinking water on on our groundwater here in Wisconsin. The next slide. Oh. So we made up our own list. We'll see what's coming next. I thought there was one more in there. We made up our own list of Clean Water Act, Safe Drinking Water Act integration to add a little detail to the toolkit. The ones that are checked off are the low-hanging fruit, and the others are the ones that we're working on. I'm going to talk very briefly about some of the low-hanging fruit that we feel like we've already picked here in Wisconsin. Next slide. First of all, our overarching plans. Our nutrient reduction strategy acknowledges that we have both phosphorus and nitrogen issues. We're getting a good handle on our phosphorus reductions through both our historic discharge permitting work and our relatively new numerical phosphorus standards for that target non-point sources. And we've also updated our non-point source program plan. I don't have such an exciting picture or a website yet. I anticipate we will have that. We've been working closely with our non-point source colleagues, and with an attempt to tackle some of our nitrogen-related nutrient problems. Next slide. Next slide. So I think this set of graphics from our nutrient reduction strategy will give you a good idea of some of the challenges that we face. The red circles you can see are the areas of overlap in the top nutrient loading sub-watersheds. The boxes show some of the challenges. Increasing nitrogen in groundwater in that yellow box at the bottom, and you can see that's reflected in both our streams and our groundwater, but not in phosphorus at all. And then in the red circle, it's a little bit fuzzy, but if you look inside the red circle on the phosphorus loading graphic, you can see there's one little sub-watershed in the middle of that red circle, and it's the only one that shows up in the red circles for nitrogen in streams and nitrogen in groundwater. This is not surprising to us because of the behavior of nitrogen and phosphorus, but it just reflects one of the challenges that we're confronting in geographic targeting. And I'll talk a little bit about how we're overcoming some of that and what we're doing in the meantime. Next slide. There's our non-point source program plan. This is one of the ways we're trying to refocus on a smaller scale, perhaps, than statewide, and help watershed by watershed, county land and water plan, 9 key element plan scale to align work on both nitrogen and phosphorus. Next slide. So while we're trying to work on the larger scale of aligning our geographic priorities, we've worked on just some of our day-to-day drivers that we actually have some control over. And so we're using just the routine Clean Water Act tools to help us tackle the issues of nitrate in our groundwater, and we've really streamlined and improved the way that we manage discharges of municipal waste to groundwater near our community water systems. Next slide. One area, despite the recent economic downturn, our dairy industry is thriving, and it hasn't stopped despite economic challenges. And we've been hard at work with our colleagues who manage that permitting program to try to really see what we can do to meet no discharge conditions. We've been working hard to implement a separation distance from groundwater at production facilities. We have been implementing some groundwater monitoring so that folks can identify where nitrate might be coming from and tackle that problem, nitrate or bacteria, and we've also been doing some broader scale assessment. We're in the midst of working on this in decisions on new animal feeding operations by using groundwater modeling and other techniques to assess the groundwater impacts of new animal feeding operations and attempt to address those at the design stage. Next page, next slide, I mean. One of our other big efforts, and this will feed back into our nutrient management planning and 319 work, is really working hard in partnership with our Natural Resource Conservation Service and State Department of Ag partners and the ag industry as a whole to update our nutrient management standards to align with the federal standard that gives attention to the problem of nitrogen in light of Gulf hypoxia. And that will also help the groundwater we drink here in Wisconsin. We're nearing the end of a multi-year effort to update this technical standard, and it includes some provisions such as larger raw manure spreading setbacks, more emphasis on right time, right place tools to work on nitrogen leaching loss, as well as runoff-driven phosphorus. And our NRCS has also developed and is testing a nitrogen index tool so that producers can actually test nitrogen management scenarios for leaching loss. Next slide. Oh, so that's where, we're kind of down to that's the low-hanging fruit that I think we've picked. And next slide, we're going on to some of the bigger challenges. Our discharge permit process, this seems like something simple, but we've been trying to inject into our discharge permitting process the concept of to comply with our phosphorus standard, dischargers are enabled to trade. Permits are coming due all the time. They're working with county conservation departments and others to find trade partners, and we're trying to, in the scramble to implement that process, we're trying to make it routine that either the consultant or our permit review staff are looking for those trade opportunities in wellhead protection areas of our public water systems. That's a challenge that we are tackling right now, developing guidance and trying to develop some on-the-ground examples. Next slide.
Mary Ellen, that's the end of the slideshow.
Oh my goodness. I think you didn't get all my slides yesterday then. Oh, I'm sorry, Dan.
That's okay. My slide deck has 12 slides in it.
Oh no, mine has 18 slides. Uh-oh. I wonder what, I have it on my desktop. Is there a way that...
Yeah, you could email it to me really quickly, and then I'm going to look in my email as well just to make sure I didn't get more than one.
No, I thought it went through in a single message, Dan. I was watching it to see that. So I was going to, and I'll just keep on talking. My plan was to show you a couple of pictures, and the pictures are just sort of static view of our nitrate demonstration project, and I think this might be what Sid was waiting for an update on. There are a couple ways we're trying to identify opportunities for Clean Water Act, Safe Drinking Water Act collaboration here in Wisconsin, and one is data-driven. As a part of finding locations for our nitrate demonstration project, we've scanned the entire state to identify those subwatersheds that have the largest number of public water systems above 5 milligrams per liter nitrate. And we've also identified susceptible drinking water receptors like schools and daycares. Here comes Dan. We'll see if it goes through this time.
Okay, great.
We have, data alone obviously doesn't drive action. The Environmental Health Commission and the Conservation Department in that square county that I showed you in our nutrient management strategy both petitioned us to do a nitrate demonstration project in their county, but unfortunately weren't able to get producer participation. So we are working in 3 places, Spring Green, Fall Creek, and Wapaka, where agricultural producers, county, public water systems have all agreed to cooperate and are developing scientific approaches that could be used for major water suppliers to answer the question about what BMPs to use where to keep public water systems in compliance with the nitrate standard. We know from watershed management research that farmers really want to know that if they're going to make a change, a fundamental change to their operation in terms of what kind of fertilizer, when, what kind of equipment, that they really want to know that that is going to make a difference, that a real water quality goal is going to be met, and primarily they do want to do that. They also want to know the effect of that change on their operations. And water systems, public water systems that are spending ratepayer money also want to be certain that if they are spending time and money and not investing in infrastructure, that they are actually going to get a water quality compliance result. So our nitrate demonstration project is an effort to use supply well vulnerability and groundwater modeling tools together with crop and soil modeling to really prove the concept that wellhead protection or non-point source management on the landscape is a certain way to keep municipal supply wells in compliance with the nitrate standard. And I think we know from the level of association of other pollutants with nitrate that if you manage that, you'll be able to manage some of the other water quality concerns. I could tell you interesting details about the methods that we are applying. Let's see if all my slides are... Nope, I'm going to get back to the webinar. Let's see.
Mary Ellen, I haven't received an email with the updated slides yet.
All right. Well, I can't see if it's gone out. I'm just going to take a minute here, Dan, and take a look and see if this hits up.
And we can make sure that the full slide deck is what's included when we post everything online. So if there's slides people don't get to see today.
It looks to me like it has. Let me see if it has gone out.
In the inbox, I think it said undeliverable. If you go back up.
Okay. I wonder if I do have to.
Go back.
You know, I'm just about done. So to avoid taking my colleagues' time, I'll split this in 2 and make sure that you get it, unless one of my colleagues wants to see if they can send you the second half of it.
Okay.
But in the meantime, again, as I said, I could tell you some interesting details about the methods that we are using for at least a couple hours. We're partnering with USGS, our Geologic and Natural History Survey, our Wisconsin Land and Water Conservation Association, which is the umbrella group of our county conservation departments, as well as agricultural modelers and soil scientists at University of Wisconsin to bring those tools together and demonstrate that we really can, with certainty, project and protect water supply well compliance by work on the landscape. And we're anticipating that this tool will be the basis for community approaches that will support under the umbrella of our 319 plan. So my next slide would have been a picture of one of our challenges that we found in just a general outreach meeting in one of our partner communities with the Public Works Director and the County Conservationist, and that is a small feedlot, not a permitted operation, probably not a stone's throw from one of the major public supply wells that we're targeting for nitrate reduction. And since those two county staffers drive by that site every day, I'm pretty confident that we'll get some resolution of that potential problem. But we're betting that our local non-point source planning, whether it's a county land and water plan or a 9 key element plan that's shepherded by the Department of Natural Resources or a watershed group, that this is the approach that will get us implementation, proof of concept, and just general better protection of our groundwater supplies. In 53 of our 72 counties, local health agencies are actually under contract to do the sampling and inspection of public water systems, and they sit right down the hall from the county conservationists who are responsible for land and water planning. We've got about half a dozen counties now that have applied for grants, either targeted runoff management or CDC or other health related grants to begin working on groundwater protection issues. So we've made the progress that we have by, first of all, just increasing awareness amongst our colleagues about the other non-point pollutant. We have been pretty well phosphorus focused here in Wisconsin as the limiting nutrient in our many lakes and rivers, but I think folks are beginning to see the groundwater issues coming to the fore. And we've formed organizations within our agency, a watershed assessment, restoration, and protection group that representatives from our public water system program and I sit on. We've been training field inspectors on the Clean Water Act side, both urban and agricultural. We've been speaking at our local land and water and health department conferences. We've put our overlays of state data out there so that folks can see mutual opportunities when they're prompted to look. And right now we are trying to use our Safe Drinking Water Act tools to deliver routine reminders of working on groundwater at the same time as we are working on phosphorus in our surface waters through our vulnerability assessment and sanitary survey processes. Our VA process already delivers a reminder when communities are looking at contaminant sources within their wellhead protection areas, and we have an objective to build that into our sanitary survey processes. Once we get over the hump with some of the challenges of implementing the revised total coliform rule, those find and fix assessments might be another opportunity for us to look for, if it's not a system problem and it's a source problem, to look for landscape sources. So before I close, this slide would have my contact information. It's Mary, M-A-R-Y, Vollbrecht, V as in Victor, O-L-L, B as in boy, R-E-C-H-T, at wisconsin.gov. Pretty straightforward. And I want to acknowledge the contributions of my colleagues here in Wisconsin, both at Wisconsin DNR, the university, and at our partner state agencies for actually making what I've talked about happen and continuing to put up with me giving talks like this repeatedly in an effort to bring these efforts together. And Dan, I know you'll be keeping questions to the end, so I look forward to seeing those and to talking with folks on the line who might have tackled these same challenges or might have tackled the ones that we are looking forward to.
Great, thank you, Mary Ellen. That was really informative. And for anyone, if you weren't able to very quickly copy down her email address. Mine is on the screen, and you can certainly email me, and I can put you in touch with Mary Ellen and others in Wisconsin. So our last presentation for the day, and then we'll have some closing remarks, is from Josh Casper. And Josh, I'm unmuting you now as I pull up the slide deck. Josh is from the state of Delaware, the DNREC Division of Water. Josh, are you there?
I'm here. Hi, Dan.
Great. Oh, yeah, you're coming in loud and clear. I've got your slides pulled up, so go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Dan, for the introduction and the invitation to participate in this webinar. Again, my name is Josh Casper. I'm a hydrogeologist with the Delaware DNREC, and this presentation is an overview of our approach to assessing statewide groundwater quality. These assessments are intended to fulfill our reporting obligations as outlined under Section 305B of the Clean Water Act. And the primary focus of this talk is the framework, kind of the nuts and bolts, how we do these assessments. But I will try to provide a few examples of the types of data we look at, and just to give the audience a flavor of what we do. Next slide, please. Okay, this is an overview of the presentation. It's broken into 6 parts. I'm going to talk briefly about just background information, why we assess statewide groundwater quality and why we do it the way we do. And I'm going to talk about our sources of data, sources of well data, and sources of groundwater data that we access to do these assessments. I'm going to talk briefly about the general hydrogeologic framework of Delaware and the public well network in Delaware and how it ties into that hydrogeologic framework. And I'm going to talk a little bit about trends. We look at various parameters in these assessments, but for the sake of this presentation, I'm just going to focus on nitrate, since this is an NPS community, it sounds. I thought that would be of most interest. And lastly, I'm going to wrap things up with just the kind of the pros and cons of this approach that we use. Next slide, please. Okay, our framework for these 305B groundwater assessments is based on federal requirements and also guidelines that have been established by the EPA. Starting with the Clean Water Act, the Clean Water Act says that states are required to assess groundwater quality to the extent practical and report the results to EPA every 2 years. EPA in turn reports those results to Congress. And in 1997, EPA developed some guidelines to better assist states in doing these assessments. And in those guidelines, they recommend or suggest that states use available ambient groundwater data. And they ask that we account for hydrogeology in these assessments. And they also ask that we consider water quality criteria such as drinking water standards and so forth. This reporting methodology that we use, we've been using since 2008, and some of the results that I'm going to highlight are based on our latest 2014 assessment. And lastly, I want to recognize our funding source is through EPA grant that we get pursuant to Section 106 of the Clean Water Act. Next slide, please. Okay, as I said, our approach relies heavily on existing public well data. At the bottom left-hand corner, you have the DENREC data. That's our well data. And from the DENREC database, we're able to get the DENREC ID, which in Delaware is the well permit number. We also get the coordinates of that well, the X and Y, and we also get the depth of the well, the Z. And in many cases, we have aquifer information associated with these wells. The water quality data are from our Division of Public Health, Office of Drinking Water. And really what we try to focus on is, hopefully everybody could see it, it's the area in the circle. We try to focus on the raw water tap data. And provided those data are identified by that DENREC ID, that well permit number, we can associate those data the water quality data can be associated with geographic coordinates, depths, and aquifers. So the dendritic ID really, for our purposes, is sort of the weak link. If that's not used as an identifier in the sample, we're very limited as to what we can do. Next slide, please. Okay, SDWA, for those unfamiliar with the acronym, is the Safe Drinking Water Information System. That is the source of our water quality data. And the parameters that we look at in our assessments include basic chemistry, so things like nitrate, total dissolved solids, chloride, sodium. We also look at organic compounds, things like MTBE, TCE, and benzene. Trace elements, for example, arsenic is one that we look at, and we also look at radionuclides. Generally, the data are limited for radionuclides, but we do try to assess whatever data have been collected during the reporting period. Again, for the purpose of this talk, though, I'm just going to focus a little bit on some of the nitrate trends that we look at, again, to give the audience a flavor of what we do and how we do it. Next slide, please. Okay, so this slide is an general illustration of the hydrogeologic framework of Delaware. Our geology, just like everywhere, is heterogeneous and complex, but for the purpose of these 305B assessments, it is simplified. Delaware falls within two physiographic provinces. In the northern portion of the state is the Piedmont, and the southern portion of the state, highlighted in tan there, is the Atlantic Coastal Plain province. Most of Delaware, about 96%, is within the coastal plain, and as indicated on the cross-section, is where we have sedimentary rocks, kind of a layer cake type geology, and at the very surface, highlighted in the cross-section, highlighted in sort of a darker blue, that's our superficial aquifer system, and I highlight that here because that aquifer is not only an important source of drinking water, it's an important source of water to streams via groundwater discharge. And it's also because in many areas it functions as a water table aquifer. It's very susceptible to human influence. In the north, we have again, in the Piedmont, we have crystalline rock, so we have fractured rock aquifers. And so overall, statewide, we have about 15 aquifers, but for the purpose of reporting, as highlighted at the upper right, we've broken things down into just 5 aquifer types. And then for the coastal plain, those include the unconfined, confined, and semi-confined aquifers. In the Piedmont, we have the fractured rock aquifer and the karst aquifer, which corresponds with a marble. Next slide, please. Okay, moving on to well network, we have almost 1,200 active public water supply wells in Delaware, and aquifer type has been identified for a large fraction of those, about 82%. That means that the well records have been reviewed by a geologist and with reference to geologic mapping and cross-sections and so on. The aquifer type has been established. Most of our wells are in the coastal plain, about 77%. 5% are in Piedmont aquifers, and then there's another 18% or so that either our aquifer type is unknown or has not yet been assigned. And lastly, most of our wells, about 52%, are located in Sussex County, which is our southernmost county. And I apologize, it looks like some of the symbols on the map are distorted. That's probably a font issue. I apologize for that. Next slide, please. Okay, so these are 3 maps. And again, this is probably not going to be clear to the viewer, but these are 3 maps of our coastal plain wells. From left to right, we have unconfined wells, and the middle map is confined wells, and the map to the right is a map of semi-confined wells. Focusing on the map to the far left, the unconfined well map, most of our unconfined wells, about 81%, are located in Sussex County or southernmost county. And so as a result of that, we do a good job of assessing groundwater in that county. Unfortunately, we don't do a very good job of assessing the unconfined aquifer in the central county, Kent County, or Newcastle County, or northernmost county. Although the aquifer there isn't used so much for public supply, the unconfined aquifer in those areas is certainly used by domestic users, and so it's kind of a shortcoming with our assessment. Next slide, please. So these are maps of wells in our Piedmont. To the left, the map to the left is the fractured rock aquifer wells, and the map to the right shows wells in our karst aquifer system, the Cockeysville Marble. Next slide. This is a histogram of well depths, and as you can see, well depths are pretty well skewed. They range from 22 feet to almost 1,000 feet, with a median depth of 140 feet, and the 25th and 75th percentiles are provided there. Next. Some things to consider, some caveats when looking at public well data. This happens to be an irrigation well. This is a cross-section of an irrigation well, high-capacity irrigation well in our unconfined aquifer. And the purpose of this is just to illustrate that, like this in the irrigation well, many public wells have very long screen intervals. They have very high pumping capacities and can exert a substantial influence on the groundwater flow system. And as a result, the data that we get for these wells can be a mixture of variable groundwater age and as well as variable groundwater chemistry. For local scale studies, that might not be a good thing, but we're looking at statewide groundwater quality, where really we're interested in sort of bulk water quality, and I think that this approach is okay. Next slide. Okay, moving on to trends. We look at, as I mentioned before, we look at various parameters, and we try to look at various types of trends. We look at trends with respect to aquifer type, spatial trends, depth trends, and we also try to look at temporal trends. And in this example, this is nitrate versus aquifer type. It's a box plot, and it shows the results, the nitrate results, with respect to those 5 aquifer types. We use a threshold of 0.4 milligrams per liter to differentiate between natural water chemistry and water chemistry affected by anthropogenic activities, and that's based on work by the USGS on the Delmarva Peninsula. Overall, about 43% of all samples exceed that 0.4 milligram per liter threshold. The unconfined aquifer, and that's the box plot second from the left, it's the most susceptible aquifer when we consider nitrate results. It has a median nitrate concentration of 4.2 milligrams per liter, and it also has the largest fraction of samples, about 87% exceed that 0.4 milligram per liter threshold. The confined wells, in contrast, that's the third from the left. They are the least susceptible to human influence. They have the lowest median nitrate concentration and the smallest fraction of samples, about 8.6% of the samples exceed that 0.4 milligram per liter threshold. But as you can see, there are several instances where confined wells do have nitrate. In some areas, they are more susceptible to human influence. And really, looking at the graph as a whole, all of our aquifers, to some degree, are susceptible to human influence when you consider the nitrate data. Next slide. Okay, so the last slide was trends with respect to aquifer type. These are, this map shows nitrate trends in map view, spatial trends in nitrate. And again, hopefully, I believe that Dan will share this PowerPoint with the group, and just make sure you have Esri fonts on. I think you should be able to see the symbols. They are distorted on the screen right now, but in any case, yeah, I don't think I can really describe these figures because of the distortion. So I apologize. I do have.
Yeah, sorry, Josh. This is Dan. Let me jump in. We're obviously having some font issues here, and we'll make sure for everyone who's online today and to share out, we'll get a good PDF version of this presentation that's got the correct font, so these maps are a little clearer to understand in the legend. So I apologize for that.
Oh, that's okay. That's great, Dan. Thank you. And I should mention too that, and at the end I'll mention this. There is a report that goes along with this assessment, as with all of our assessments. So if you really want to drill into the details and look at these figures in more detail, you can do that. And I'll provide that link at the end of this presentation. But really, what I wanted to show here, the map at the right is the map of nitrate in our confined and semi-confined wells, and in most cases, those wells have nitrate below that 0.4 milligram per liter threshold, but there are instances where that threshold is exceeded. In fact, we have some areas where the nitrate concentration in confined or semi-confined wells exceeds that 10 milligram per liter MCL. So it does happen, and the spatial analysis allows us to see where it happens. Again, difficult to see, but in the northern portion of the state, those are semi-confined or confined Potomac aquifer wells. Our Potomac aquifer is an important source of drinking water in Newcastle County, but very heterogeneous, and obviously, if you look at the nitrate data, it is susceptible to nitrate, susceptible to human influence. And then the only point that I wanted to make, the map to the left of unconfined nitrate, again, just most of our data is for Sussex County down in the southern portion of the state. We don't have very good data coverage for the remainder of the state, but we have some plans to try to fill in those gaps and address those kind of spatial gaps. Next slide, please. Okay, so trends, nitrate trends that we look at trends with respect to well depth. And as you can see, based on this scatter plot, the blue are the unconfined wells, the red are the confined, green is semi-confined, orange and yellow are kind of hard to differentiate, but those are the fractured and karst aquifer type wells. There's a clear decreasing trend in nitrate with depth. At around 200 feet in Delaware, there's a fairly abrupt change, and this suggests that wells that are shallower than 200 feet are probably the most susceptible to human influence. Some of the deepest nitrate detections are associated with the karst and fractured rock aquifer types, and those wells that produce from those aquifers, they often have open intervals that intersect several hundred feet of rock, and so therefore the nitrate could be entering at a shallow depth. These are just total well depths. So just a side note there. Next slide, please. And the last thing, this plot actually doesn't show up in any of our assessments, but this is just based on the last 4 assessments. This is nitrate, trends in nitrate in the unconfined aquifer over time. And although there are some outliers, some elevated nitrate concentrations, if you look at just sort of the core statistics, for example, the median shown in green, there's very little change over time. in our unconfined aquifer, at least for these last 4 reporting cycles. Next slide. This slide is just to it's borrowed. The figure, I should start out by saying, is borrowed from the U.S. Geological Survey, and the citation is there at the bottom. It's intended just to show how, in the unconfined aquifer, how groundwater age is stratified. And there is a well that penetrates this aquifer in the image, and it's pumping water out of this aquifer. And really, this is kind of analogous to what our assessment does. We're looking at wells that are generally deep, generally have long screen intervals, and probably are producing water that's older water that's deeper in the flow system. This is still important because this water, from a non-point source pollution standpoint, if you're looking at water, groundwater that's eventually going to discharge to a stream, it's still important, but it's not the complete picture. If you want to, for example, gauge the effectiveness of a BMP, say an agricultural BMP, you might want to look at that light blue region right at the water table, right below an ag field or a residential field, so that you can capture the young, recently recharged groundwater. And we actually, in Delaware, there is a project underway that's doing just that. It's a cooperative effort involving the U.S. Geological Survey and our Delaware Department of Agriculture. So just trying to put things into context with respect to groundwater age and where these data are coming from. Next slide. Okay, so as with any approach, there are pros and cons, and I try to list some of those here. In terms of pros, we're using existing data, so there's substantial cost savings. The data are in electronic format, and so this permits rapid assessment capabilities, and moreover, it allows us to have a very reproducible methodology. And as I've indicated, we have pretty good data coverage for coastal plain aquifers in Delaware. Some of the cons, we have limited field data. For example, we have no dissolved oxygen data, no specific conductivity data. Those are parameters that are often measured in the field when wells are sampled, and the DO data, or dissolved oxygen data, would be very helpful when looking at redox sensitive parameters such as nitrate and iron. In Delaware, we do have data sharing limitations due to state law, and those limitations prohibit us from sharing the coordinates of these public wells. So this limits how we can actually report the data. We have limited data for Piedmont aquifers, and there is some potential bias in the data set. Again, these wells are generally deeper in the flow system, and moreover, many public wells will try to avoid groundwater contamination if they can, and so they may drill a deeper well, they may blend water, or so on. So there is some, by using public well data, we may be introducing some bias, but it's sort of the best that we can do. And there are some spatial data gaps. I mentioned the unconfined well coverage is really limited to Sussex County for the most part, and again, that aquifer blankets pretty much the entire coastal plain of Delaware, and it is used in other parts of the state. So at the very bottom there, we have potential improvements, and one of the things that we're looking at doing and hopefully trying to fill those spatial data gaps is to incorporate LIMS data. LIMS stands for Laboratory Information Management System, and these data are managed by public health and therefore the private well testing program in our state. So we're hoping to try to use that information to fill those gaps and hopefully do a better job at assessing statewide groundwater quality. Next slide. Okay, so that pretty much wraps it up. As I mentioned, there is a report that goes along with this assessment. Here's the cover page, and the URL is provided that'll give you access to this report and previous assessments. My contact information is there, but I believe Dan wants you to channel any questions through him, but I'll be happy to answer any questions that Dan gives me. But thanks again for the opportunity. I appreciate it, and that's all I have.
Great. Thank you, Josh, very much. And I'll just clarify, anybody who wants to email Josh directly or any of the other speakers, please feel free to do so. But I'm also happy to take those questions, and the benefit of sending them to me is I'm going to compile all these questions, share them with all the speakers and all of the association staff, so then if we have some additional detail to add, we can do that, and then we'll send it out to the group. But thank you, Josh, very much for that presentation. That was great. So that is the end of the presentation portion, and I'm gonna, as I'm talking, I'm gonna unmute Jim Taft from SDWA and Susan Kirsch from AQUA. In conclusion, we just wanted to talk a little bit about, very briefly, what we'll plan to do going forward. So this toolkit has now been a kind of a over 2-year, close to maybe 3-year process where we had the development of the various sections, state, EPA, and association work groups working on all those sections, a long and thorough review of the full document, and then the publication, and then over the course of several months this year, as I said earlier, 4 webinars to kind of delve into how we think states can use this toolkit to better learn about the various programs, know who your counterparts are, and then moving forward, though this is the end of the webinar portion, we don't want this document just to kind of fall into the background of history. So each of the associations will be working on some things. For GWPC, we'll continue to use this toolkit to help inform us about specific sessions at our upcoming meetings. And then we may also be looking into figuring out how some of these programs might be able to interact with underground injection control programs to better protect source water, and sharing some kind of state success stories about that. And we may even do a webinar in the new year. But Jim and Susan, are you there? Can we hear you?
Can you hear me, Dan?
Yeah. Yep. I can hear you both. Susan, why don't you go first?
Sure. And thank you again to Dan and GWPC and SDWA, Jim and Deirdre, for all your work on the toolkit and for putting this together today. AQUA, remains very interested in this topic, and going forward in the new year, I know for sure our Nonpoint source work group recently kind of looked at various topics and activities we can focus on in the new year, and source water protection and sort of that cross-program coordination component was one of the things that rose to the top as an area that folks would be interested in more discussion and examples and state success stories. So we expect to potentially have some more dialogue on this topic, and we'll certainly keep SDWA and GWPC in the loop on our activities, and welcome your memberships to participate in that. So thank you again for the great presentations today, and we look forward to more discussion.
Great. Thank you, Susan. Jim?
Thanks, Dan. And thanks very much to the speakers this afternoon, Sid, Mary Ellen, and Josh. Great work. Appreciate your sharing on that. This is, as Dan mentioned, the last of the 4 webinars, but we're certainly not done with this topic. In fact, we're really just getting started. I think the trick here, the real challenge, is kind of embedding this collaborative approach in our day-to-day business, making it kind of part and parcel of our work. We do speak different languages, no doubt about it. As Dan mentioned, it was probably 2.5 to 3 year effort to kind of put all the pieces together, and a lot of it was kind of educating ourselves in terms of understanding how our respective programs work, but trying to make sure it is sort of embedded in our everyday work. It makes it much easier to consider these various tools and leveraging one another's authorities at the appropriate time as we do our work. So that's something that I think we will collectively seek to work on together, I think, going forward. For SDWA as an organization, we've got a number of things that we'd like to do. We have 2 big meetings each year, one in the spring and one in the fall, and certainly source water protection generally, and Clean Water Act, Safe Drinking Water Act, collaboration, cooperation in particular will be among the things that we talk about, continue to talk about. We have seen in recent years that the challenges of protecting our sources are not getting any easier. Harmful algal blooms, just to mention one particular example, and the contributors being nitrogen and phosphorus and extreme weather, and just a whole series of challenges that speak to the need to kind of work together closely. We also would like to kind of mine the good work that you guys do and identify some good case examples that could be shared in terms of short write-ups as well as webinars. This is kind of the last of the 4 formal webinars, but I think webinars are a really good technique to share information. So as we have a couple of good case examples and show that good cross-program collaboration, we'd love to share that. So we'll be reminding you of our desire to kind of identify those things. So again, thanks to all for participating in today's webinar, and more importantly than that, thanks for your hard work that you do every day on behalf of clean and safe water. So Dan, I'll turn it back to you.
Great, thank you, Jim and Susan. Those are really good updates. And so, just a reminder, we're done now, with this webinar. But all 3 associations will be following up with emails out to you, where we will give you links to this recorded presentation, so you can share it with others in your staff. Links to the various presentations that were given, and each of which have contact information for the speakers, and then I'll be following up with any questions I get. I understand it is late afternoon Friday, so I'll leave the question line open really all of next week or any time. You can follow up with me on questions about any of the presentations. But